Gentlemen, good afternoon. This is our fifth panel of the day. As Kelly said, this one is future driven. I'm Ron Monty. I'm one of your moderators. Ben is my co-moderator for this panel. A lot of the conversations today has been based around the fact that organizations really need to be business focused, technology enabled, and human powered. And that last one really has been the one that's really come to the forefront. That if we give our end users, give our knowledge workers the tooling and the data that they need, organizations will be able to really survive and thrive within the current crisis and beyond. And so really wanted to focus today on a bunch of different topics. Gonna do a real quick set of intros around the room. With us today, we have Paul Battle from Lenovo. He's one of our strong partners. Paul's gonna be able to bring that big global perspective. So Paul, you just give a few seconds to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. I'm Paul Battle, director of our data center channel VAR business and distribution business for all of North America. So thank you for having me.
Fantastic. We also have Michael De Palma. Now, Michael is from Datto. They're all about data protection, and that's one of the topics I'm sure we're going to get into is security and data protection today, because as we now have enabled all of our end users to connect, that data is now a little more accessible. So, Michael?
Yeah, so I am the Senior Channel Development Manager at Datto. I travel all around the country doing seminars and things like this, so hopefully I can bring some of those perspectives that I've heard from other small businesses around the world.
Fantastic. We also have with us Nick Heddy. Now, Nick is with Pax8. They're one of our distribution partners, and Nick can really bring that perspective of being right in the middle of the supply chain for IT. Right on the one side is folks like us and our customers, and on the other side are all the technology vendors and providers that he helps support us with. So, Nick, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. Nick Heddy, Chief Revenue Officer at Pax8. We are cloud distribution. We serve over 10,000 partners and their 100,000 customers that are downstream. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be on the panel.
Fantastic. And a real pleasure to have John Newt with us. John is the co-founder of Alfresco and Documentum. Been a long-time partner with these folks, and really data and workflow is, as I said, really becoming the center of the universe, the center of gravity for a lot of organizations. So, John, welcome.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. I'm also, aside from working in the content management space, I'm in the process of writing a book about digital transformation and particularly the patterns of digital transformation. So it may come up as part of this conversation.
I'm sure. Well, actually, one of the recurring themes is, can we do patterning anymore, right? All the past results we had, we used to feed models into. Are those out the window? Or there's something we'll be able to leverage? So really good stuff. So last member of the crew here, Ben. Ben's actually gonna have our first question, so I'll kick it over to you last. Ben, hello.
All right, thank you very much, Ron. Appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. So gonna jump right into this. So we've all heard a lot about the new landscape of IT, and clearly we have a lot more people working from home, leveraging collaboration tools. What do you think is gonna happen when people get back to work? Do you think that some of the usage of those tools is gonna lessen? Nick, can we start with you?
Absolutely. Pax8, we use all the tools that we're selling. So things like Teams, Zoom, Datto, everything we do is cloud-based. And so the decision to work from home, we were able to execute on it in 48 hours. So we ourselves had to take the advice that we're giving to our partners. And I think we've seen 2 years of digital transformation happen in 2 months. And we are communicating better than we ever have before. The drive-by meetings where things don't get written down and no action is actually taken are a thing of the past. So I try to get my team to focus on the positives, which is we're evolving at a faster pace. We're better aligned than we ever have been. So these are good things. And when people come back, I hope that we don't lose the alignment that we've been able to gain over these last 2 months. I think it's inevitable to see some of the slip. It's a good thing because people are also reporting that they're working a whole lot more around the clock, meetings back to back. So I hope we're able to take the positive and leave some of the negative, and perhaps the face-to-face just adds balance to our life.
That'd be great. That takes place. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll echo Nick's comments that I do think there's going to be a rebalance. Look, if prior to that, most people weren't working from home. There were definitely remote employees, but it caused, you know, a force of pretty much everyone being remote. I don't think we're going to just jump right back into where we were. That's an impossibility, or we're going to cause a wave 2 of this thing and go back to kind of being remote again. So it's going to be an ease in. So to your exact question, are we going to kind of see a reduction in work from home? Yeah, I mean, you're going to see somewhat of a reduction as some people start to migrate back to offices, but it's not going to be everyone. And I think there's also going to be an appropriation from a lot of organizations, A, how they're run, B, how they're handled from an HR perspective, because work-life balance has been completely kind of, you know, unseated from this. And that's kind of part of the conversation is what actually now is the best organization to kind of hit your business goals, and then subsequently what technology is needed to support that. So you're going to see a counterbalance back to, but it's not going to be the full-fledged back to normal. There will be a new normal, and I think that's going to be a lessening of work from home, but not again everyone back into the offices like they were before. You're going to see, so I think you're going to see some more autonomy from the employees to be able to work from home once, twice a week, where before they were full in office and so on. So I think there are some changes that will come from that.
You know, Paul, I wanted to dig into that a little bit more, right? Because we are trying to, you know, focus on the future here quite a bit. Like, so this rush to get everyone working from home was really a sprint, right? Organizations really had to change. I think, you know, Nick, you said it, within, you know, 48 hours, do what would have taken weeks or months in a normal project. So on the comeback from that, right, as we get back into, you know, we start to see restrictions eased, do you think that's going to happen quickly? Do you think that's going to happen over time? Like, how do you see that I don't like to use the word new normal. I think people are getting a little fatigued by that phrase, but how do you see that, you know, that next evolution occurring? Is that going to be something we can really step into, or do you think it's going to be like this was, we were fast in and kind of fast out?
Yeah, and I'll use the other cliche statement. It depends. So it depends on the state, depends on the country, depends on the company. So do I expect airlines to bounce right back? I think we could all agree on this phone that no, there's no way that airlines are going to be bouncing back to where they were prior to this thing. So it depends on all those factors, right? So it's going to be, from my perspective, I think there's now going to be a very serious business discussion, you know, about costs. So how much am I now spending versus how much I'm earning, and what do I look like from a future perspective? So I think they're going to start to look at that more balanced and then say, okay, what technology do I need now to support this new environment that we're now in? So for us, right, as a company, I mean, again, we're going to see, my expectation is we're going to start to see again more ease on people required to go into the office. So if you're an operations role, and you've 100% you have to be in the office at 8:30 to 5 o'clock or whatever your hours are, that sort of kind of is going to change. I think that sort of scenario is going to change. You're going to allow people a bit more flexibility with their work environment. So it's going to require these sorts of technologies, better video environments, right? We're still two-dimensional. There's some three-dimensional tools out there in the marketplace actually that makes actually doing a conference call like this more real. You actually feel like you're in the same room with a person versus kind of, again, it looks like there's a barrier. So there's things like that will start to come, and technology will come out, better collaboration. So a lot of tools now have kind of whiteboarding. So you'll start to see whiteboards more generally used in conference calls versus before you had to kind of all be in the same location. And it, quite frankly, unless you were in the same location, it didn't feel like it was really whiteboarding and those sorts of things. So you're going to see this kind of transformation from that perspective, but it's going to depend on the location, the type of company, and certain ones will jump right back in, certain ones it will take, quite frankly, years to kind of get back
I'd like
to
to pull that. I'd like to pull John into this conversation too. I think that's great, Paul. I think that, you know, John, you had mentioned transformation in your opening. You know, and transformation used to be something I think folks would think about and plan for and then do. I think that's really been turned on its head, right? Now we see a lot of organizations, they're just doing transformation, and then at some point maybe catch their breath and kind of look back and say, you know, how have we done, or maybe not. Maybe this sprint just continues. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it does seem like there are some massive changes of plans going on right now in a number of our customers and, you know, just companies in general. You know, during times of recession or huge changes right now, I don't think we're going to actually bounce right back. I think we're ready for a major reconfiguration of the entire economy. It happened after the last recession. You look at who the most valuable companies in the world were just before the 2008 recession, it was the oil companies. Who is it now? It's the tech companies. Who's it going to be after this whole thing? It's going to be the tech companies. I just think everything's going to digital. I think whole jobs are just going to be no longer relevant or just be cut down dramatically. So what is the impact on the workplace? Is it going to change? Are these digital transformation initiatives going to go forward? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's where people, some industries were somewhat reluctant to go to the cloud. Now they're going to go full force in the cloud. There's like just a massive shift in banking where they were just reluctant to take that leap, except for certain areas. They're going to do that. Are they going to allow people to work from home? Absolutely. I mean, a lot of industries, it had already started. In our industry, well, our company, I think people came into work like 2 days a week in general. Lots of customers I visited, you just see this empty sea of cubicles. And that's only, that's only going to increase, especially as the cubicle probably has to double in size to maintain social distancing. So next year, I don't think any of us can really predict what things are going to be like next year, 2021. I just think it's just going to be completely different.
I would agree. And Michael, what do you think?
I mean, I think John hit it right on the head. I was on a panel earlier this week, and one of the panelists referenced a study that said that 74% of SMBs that were surveyed last month said that they believe that they're going to continue to have a remote workforce, at least a piece of it. And I think it is a huge shift. In my role, I travel all the time, so I've essentially become a remote worker for the last 4 years. We do a lot of industry events. What was interesting is now it's all shifted to these virtual events. And I have a buddy who works at Gartner on the event side, and they have huge, huge events. And they are starting to study the ROI on whether these virtual events actually make more business sense than actually going out and going to one of these halls. We participated in a industry event, virtual industry event last week, and we do it every year. Normally we'll get 400, 500 leads. We got 1,800 contacts from this virtual event. So as we start to look at it as well, it's really a shift in everything. I think there was that, kind of trepidation for a lot of business owners and managers to say, I don't want my staff working remote, almost like a non-trust thing. Now that we've seen over the last 2 months, yes, people can be very productive remotely. And yes, we can figure out ways with tools to make sure that these endpoints are secure and these, networks are secure. I think you're going to see a full shift. I think you're going to see a big shift to people being allowed to work remote. Younger people like to do that anyway. I do think this is not something where you're going to flip a switch and everybody's back at their cubicle. Definitely not that.
Very good.
Okay. On that same, just continuing this conversation, John, I probably want to go back to you for this one first. There's this push between, there's so much uncertainty. Do we do nothing? This is, a customer perspective, or do we try and make some quick move, fast advantage type of thing? So how do customers navigate that thing of not having enough data to make decisions, but not making decisions, isn't really an option?
Yeah, so your colleague, Adam Storch from MicroStrategies, and I had a conversation just before the whole lockdown started. I was in New York, scary place to be, actually, but we were just talking about what were the digital transformation plans, which really pre-COVID discussion. What has changed from his perspective and from our perspective as well is that there's more and they're smaller. And it really gets to some research I read recently. There was an article in Harvard Business Review back in May of last year where they were trying to anticipate the next recession. So they looked at what did other companies do, what did companies do as a result of previous recessions, evaluated 5,000 companies. And what they found were only about 16%, about 15%, something like that, were actually able to grow through the recession and to also maintain profitability. So you invest, but you still maintain a good business. And how did they do that? Well, they invested in digital technology, but the other thing they did was just experiment. that's all you can do in this environment because you don't know what's going to happen. I think there's going to be lots of little experiments going on to figure out what happens next. A lot of them are like new digital products, new digital services, work from home, all sorts of things. They're just going to try everything that works, and they push it to the edge in terms of allowing local experiments to happen. And if it works, then roll it out to the rest of the organization. And that's where you'll see the experimentation of working from home, applying new digital technologies, using different services, maybe just get rid of entire businesses. And I think there's going to be a lot of that over the next couple of months.
Very interesting. Nick, I'd love to pull you back in the conversation. Same idea. Like when we think about the societal changes we're going through, what the future will hold, how do you do that fight or flight response? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the list is long of companies that started during a depression or some sort of economic crisis. Coors, Costco, FedEx, Microsoft started during the 73 to 75 recession. And it is companies who can reinvent themselves quickly. So the idea of putting together a plan and trying to follow that plan for a year, that's out the window. Agile planning is more the methodology I think you'll see for the companies who can emerge out of this. But the idea of kind of retracting and not spending anything and not going anywhere, of course you're going to shrink. Of course there's going to be some negative impact. But I would argue that your marketing ROI during these periods is probably higher than it might be during a period where there's lots of noise and you have to try and cut through some of that noise. I think companies like Zoom are booming. Teams has seen growth up to 75 million active daily users. I saw their team minute meetings are up from 300 million on average daily to 2.7 billion. So 900% growth over a 60-day period. So those who can pivot quickly and see the opportunity in what is happening and not to be opportunistic, I feel like we're throwing lifelines to our partner ecosystem on here is a way you can go win. People who are slow to adopt cloud technologies, and I'm in the same space as Michael. We work with SMB. We've only seen 9% adoption of the 30.7 million small businesses in the United States. So those who have not adopted cloud yet, there has never been better market awareness around, hey, that really hurt. These last 2 months hurt. I need a better stack of technology to help me succeed. So I would say that you should blow up the plans you had leading up to this point and be agile and test things, see what works, and then when something works, lean into it.
Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, the reality is uncertainty is here. And I think that's a tough place for business owners to be in because, normally you've been in business, you kind of know some of the strategies to go with. I think that, again, it's going to be regional in terms of what strategies might work. I think sitting on seminars like this and talking to colleagues, I don't think anybody's got that silver bullet, as was mentioned earlier. And I think John said it. Nobody knows what this economy is going to look like in a year. So I think you do have to be agile, and I think you do have to be able to try things. But I think to Nick's point, it is important not to just stay stagnant. You are going to have to try some things out and figure out what's going to work for your business, whether it's size, whether it's industry, whether it's region, and the goal is to continue to grow, keep investing in those marketing strategies and those type of things, and then study what's working and what's not, and have the agility to say, okay, this has been working. Next quarter, we're going to focus more on this. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of feelers out there to figure out what works, but it's the same strategy is not going to work for every company in every region.
Very good. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, so again, I'll echo all of the comments that the guys have made, which is that it is going to depend on the type of company, but at the same time, you have to be agile in this new environment because quite frankly, none of us can read the tea leaves to the future, both from the the pandemic side of things to the economy and to specifically what region in your business. But you have to be agile enough to go and test the market and ultimately test kind of different, whether it's a marketing play or a virtual event, or even if you have something in product development from that perspective, like we do. Again, you have to test that and put it out into the marketplace and at least take a chance. You should not stop innovating. You should not stop testing that market just because we're kind of in this. Now, with that said, from a business aspect, yes, you have to go through the basic business practice. Do I have enough cash flow to support this? Those are basic business questions. And in this current environment with credit being really challenging, the kind of expenses aren't changing, yet all of a sudden our revenues are declining. So needless to say, it's one of those scenarios where you have to look at it from a business perspective and make sure that the bets that you're making are actually going to be kind of obtainable and they're realistic. But that doesn't stop you from being creative and going after the market from that perspective. So that's my recommendation to a business, right? So I talk to small, medium companies all the way up to kind of large Fortune 500, and the process is exactly the same. First and foremost, right, your business needs to be in order. You got to look at kind of your balance sheet and make sure how long you can survive, what you can actually, what money do I have to spend from a cash flow perspective on bets and so on. What do I have to work with? And then you can kind of determine. And then the next step down is, okay, what bets, what markets do we think we're going to get the best ROI in that we want to take a chance at? And then third, what are specifically the tactics and activities that we're going to shape around that particular bet that are going to make this work? And then have milestones, right? Have milestones, have checkpoints, have cadences, whatever you want to call it, ultimately as you step through it. That's kind of my recommendation that I talk to.
Yeah, and I think bets is an interesting word to use. John, I'd like to bring you on this one. Trying to understand, what do you think folks, listening should do now to really try to, consider making changes or making, bets, as Paul said, to navigate the unknown that's coming at us.
Yeah. So another piece of research that came out of the same set of articles I was looking at was that the bets are happening right now in all likelihood, that the very first set of people to be hired in these sorts of recessions, you cut down your operational costs and you start to invest in R&D, you start to invest in the agility, experimentation and stuff like that. And so IT people generally do very well in these sort of environments, even in really depressed, poor areas, like Detroit. IT people did really well in Detroit and Philadelphia and stuff like that in the last recession. So I would suggest that that's probably, something you should be investing in. Another thing that's probably worth it in terms of bets is, let's get away from technology. It's about people. You need to invest in how are you working with your customers? How are you working with your employees more effectively? Yeah, and this whole thing about remote work and whatever is just going to change everything. There's a very strong correlation in terms of design thinking, investment in things like user experience or experience design, and your ability to profit. I don't exactly know the cause and effect there, but there is a strong correlation there. Think about people. What are the outcomes that are going to come out as you make your bets? Don't just think about the technology, think about business outcomes, particularly in terms of how you're affecting people. And then finally, I just like to make one prediction. I just think the organizations are going to become really distributed, far more distributed than they are today. It's interesting to see, the whole thing with Marissa Mayer and Yahoo saying, no, it doesn't work, everybody back in the office. Well, that kind of killed Yahoo. And also maybe it changed mindset in IBM, which had become incredibly distributed. And it just went through a whole process of reconsolidating everybody to just have them be distributed all over again. I just don't think organizations are going to look the same, which means that user experience is actually going to become really important because it's not going to be face-to-face anymore.
All right, so John, you've made a prediction. That's a big word. Nick, do you have any that you can share with us?
Yeah, So what I'm noticing from our partners is that they're focusing on, I mean, waiting is not a good strategy. Think about your businesses. Are you still able to operate? If you are not, how do you fix that problem first? I've actually come up with a hierarchy of work from home needs that is probably for another call that we'll have. But it's about, are my employees safe? Am I safe? Is my family safe? Is my customer safe? Beyond that, am I able to communicate in a meaningful way to still conduct business? Am I secure? Am I backed up? And then you have a whole optimization piece. It looks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But I think people are going to start going through that checklist and moving up the pyramid until they reach that optimization. I think in my industry, and I can't speak for all, but in cloud first technology, I think we're going to see some wild adoption, and partners are reporting back to us after we got crushed with a 500% increase in ticket volume because everyone needs to work from home. Now it's normalizing. Now I have techs who are underutilized inside my organization. I don't want to let them go. We're seeing our partners focus on improving those techs. So getting education, learning new products so that when things start to come back, and it's not going to be a quick thing for most organizations, but when people come back, they come back and they're better. And when the economy bounces back, they're better positioned to capitalize on it. So that's what I'm seeing.
You know, Nick, you've brought up cloud a couple times, and you know, prior to COVID-19, a few months back, hybrid IT was a real big thing where customers were really doing that on premise with their toe in the water, if you will, into the public cloud. Do you guys think that public cloud is going to accelerate coming out of this? We start with Paul, or Nick. I'm sorry. You want to go first? And
Yeah, I do. I think obviously you see Microsoft, and again, I keep mentioning them, apologize. It's what I know most about. But they have canceled all of their events through 21 and saying we're going to be virtual until July of next year. And so for Michael and myself, I see him 100 times on the road over the course of a year. We had to pivot pretty quickly and decide what we were going to do. And an example of our innovation is we're now doing a every Wednesday series. Our partners are logging in, learning a new skill, getting a tip of the week, hearing updates on how we're coming back from work. But I think Microsoft canceling those events for the year is because this will absolutely drive cloud consumption and collaboration tools over the course of this year. So yes, I believe that public cloud is going to continue to grow at an accelerated rate.
Yeah, this is killing my Marriott status and my Delta status. I don't know what to do about that.
Bonvoy just said you're at the same level through the end of the year for next year.
Yeah, that's right. They
Bonvoy
did announce.
Glad I have platinum for life already.
There you go.
No, so John, actually, that brings up a good point, which is that, you know, the pace at which things are going to come back, industries, areas, countries, people, is going to be so varied. Like, what do you think as far as the navigation of that, as far as the future is going to be not an on or off switch?
Yeah, so I'm spending a good portion of my days watching Bloomberg these days, just because nothing makes sense anymore. What the hell's going on with the stock markets? And, you know, to a certain extent, what's happening is it's not really a V-shaped recovery. It's just a flight to quality. What you're seeing is money leaving all these other countries and then coming back, you know, coming into the United States. And also, what else are you going to put your money in? Are you going to put it in fixed income that has like no return whatsoever? Equities are the only place to put it. So this could very well be a U-shaped recovery. This could be very long, and I think you just need to be adaptable to whatever happens here longer term. You know, what happens, you know, with airlines that are going to be completely unprofitable? They can't raise the rate so much where every other seat is going to be empty, perhaps even more than that. I've been talking to people who are involved in building planning right now, where there's discussion of doubling the amount of space for every single employee. Well, what's that going to do? The construction industry? What's that going to do for office buildings and stuff like that? It just cannot look the same as it was before. And there's so many industries that are dependent on the old way of working. I just think we're in for this massive realignment. So what can you do? I think we've been talking about it. Invest in agility is what the smart people were doing before this happened. And if you haven't, then you should really be on the path toward, applying new agile methods overall. And I think just being more adaptable has to be the top priority, because you just don't know what's going to happen. But the restaurants are going to be there. Basically the occupancy of hotels. You talk about Marriott's. I got to take my daughter to college in New York, in August. And how does that work? Well, what happens is they have to leave periods of 72 hours in between hotel rooms. So what happens to the hotel industry? How can we, be selling the same amount? I just think it'll be better, bigger. It's just going to be completely different shape, and you just have to adapt to that. And hopefully have something really sticky like content management, to invest in. We're doing quite well at the moment.
Right. And Paul, what are your thoughts on that shape or recovery in general?
Totally agree. Yeah, totally agree with John. I mean, it's going to be again a slow kind of back. It's not going to just be a shoot. I heard on the last panel somebody mentioned that be prepared. The economy is going to I think I can't remember what exact word they used, but it's going to kind of go crazy to the right and up and to the right. I think that's maybe in certain sectors, yes. Considering the airline's probably going to be flatline, so maybe they're a good example of they're going to go up and to the right because you have nowhere else to go. But look, back to kind of a couple comments that were made before, right? So Nick said around the cloud and the adoption of cloud. I definitively think there's going to be an adoption of cloud, but I also think there's going to be an attention to what technology is, right? Whether it's cloud and public cloud only, kind of hybrid cloud, which I think is probably being more likely. I think there's going to also be some kind of repatriation in certain cases. I think some companies are going to make the realization that, I don't need it in the public cloud. I don't need all that. I can do this in a better way. I think MSPs, like kind of service providers, the smaller, so not the big boy, kind of Google Cloud, AWS, and Microsoft, I think they'll start getting kind of more and more adoption from that perspective, because they create that kind of balance from a hybrid perspective more effectively. They're more boutique, they're more kind of niche. I think you'll start to see kind of that adoption as we kind of come back into this and become more agile. So, but to John's point, we have to become more agile as individuals, as companies, and ultimately as a society. We have to become more agile as we come back into this. So yeah, you have to be, and I think creativity is one thing that we've not really talked about. We've kind of centered around it. Creativity and innovation comes out of times of crisis. We see it, I mean, turning certain factories that were making cars into making masks within weeks, right? I don't think anyone would have predicted us kind of to say that Ford or GM could have been able to do that without being in a crisis. So you're seeing, if you take that same mentality created, and it doesn't have to just be something physical, it can be something organizational change, it can be something from a process change. All that sort of creativity and innovation will start to take place, and you'll see some amazing transformations, not just from a straight up technology perspective, but across the board within companies. You'll start to see that come out of this as well. New ways of thinking, new ways of balancing, quite frankly. So that's why I think you're not going to see that just kind of straight up and to the right. I think because you're going to see some individuals and companies really take chances, be creative, and so on. That's why it will be a slow kind of back.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Ben?
Great. Yeah, so guys, another question for you. So I have a lot of neighbors their kids are in college right now, and I've been watching the colleges, going remote, working from home, all that stuff that we've seen in the workforce. If you guys had a student that was going into the computer science field, what skill would you guys recommend for them to focus on so that when they came out of college, they would probably have job security and very quickly get picked up? So Nick, can we start with you on that?
Yeah, my brother is a professor at the University of Oklahoma, so he is going through this experience right now that has just been wild for him. Everything is remote when he's used to giving lessons face to face. He's had to learn new tool sets on the fly, running Zoom classes and classroom sessions. But if I was given advice, I'd tell my son or daughter, get into dev and be a programmer. And every single organization is going to need that in-house at some point very soon. And that doesn't matter if you're on-premise or developing cloud technology. You're going to need your own homegrown tool that you're building yourself. So it would be become a developer.
A developer. All right. John, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. So I'm talking to you from the UK, and my daughter is English, despite my accent. And I actually presented to the girls at her girls' school about the future of jobs in digital. And most of their parents are in banking and stuff like that. So I listed out all the different jobs. Absolutely, computer science. I told them if there was one area to invest in, go into artificial intelligence. I just think that has a huge opportunity in the future. However, if you're like my daughter and you just think computer science is boring, I actually think there's always going to be a role for design. Design will always be important. It requires right brain thinking rather than left brain thinking. The other thing is, I still think there's a load of mileage in digital marketing as well. Just we're not done with the transformation of marketing as we see it today. Just look at what we've been talking about in terms of events. How can we make this like the most amazing experience? This is a pretty good experience. It's not bad, but wait next year. Wait till the production values next year. It's just going to be tremendous. That's going to be the right brain people who are going to make it that way.
Very good. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different view. So I actually have a computer engineering degree, which I would argue is not terribly useful with my C++ programming and my ability to do some hardware design. But I would actually, if I were telling my former self, I would actually go and tell them security. So one of the things with change and accelerated change. So crisis creates accelerated change. It creates a shell first, and then you kind of coming out of it, it usually creates accelerated change and creativity. With that comes that counterbalance of somebody continuing to ask the question, about privacy rules, about security, risk, and things of that nature. So you need that, and security has become more and more important. Look, we already talked about kind of the cloud adoption that's going to happen, but with that comes risk and responsibility around security and data. So I think data security and data protection from that perspective is going to be more and more critical. So that involves a number of different things. That involves programming and dev. That involves, in certain cases, design and creativity. And that also, in a lot of cases, also involves business, just flat out standard, how do I run a business from a security perspective? And so I would say security would be kind of what I would recommend somebody really getting into.
Very good. Michael, what do you think?
Well, I think that from my experience, I think a lot of the college students like the security side. You go see hackathons and all this stuff. It's kind of the cool thing. It's kind of side with Nick though on the dev side. I mean, there was already a talent gap with the amount of job openings compared to the amount of folks coming out of college that are qualified for it. We had it at Datto where there was a gap and it was really hard. We had these big referral bonuses if you can refer somebody. So that gap is only going to grow now. So in terms of it was my kid and I wanted my kid to have a secure job moving forward, I always look at supply and demand, and I think that'll be there. But I do think the security side of things, it's a more interesting piece, and there's going to be something that will be at the forefront for the rest of our lives.
Good.
Fantastic.
I do have one other comment kind of to that, right? So one of the things that is changing though is the ability for solutions to be, and I hate to use the word commoditized, but that's kind of what's happening, right? So AI many years ago was just a kind of a beautiful thought, and it's now become somewhat of a reality. We're eventually going to get to a point where it's going to be second nature to most companies because hey, I can install this, it's going to collect the data, it's going to learn, and then it's going to spit out kind of that analysis. And so DevOps and dev in general is again in a similar path, right? It's become a buzzword over the past 5 to 10 years. Subsequently, companies don't have disorganization between a DevOps group on one side that are kind of trying to, and then the actual how to implement it from an IT perspective. Those solutions are starting to crash together. Blockchain is another example of it. All these sorts of scenarios, again, in today's world, we don't have the exact plug and play technology that just goes into an organization, but we will have that in the next 5, 10 years. So I'm not trying to, I mean, the one thing that I will 100% say is constant that we're always going to need is security. And it is ever changing because the technology that it lays upon is changing. The people are changing, et cetera. So that's kind of why I say, like, I get it, dev is a big topic now. I think dev in 10 years might not be as big a topic because we'll have some automation.
So it sounds like a double major. Dev and security are where the skill set's going to be.
Breeze.
5 minutes left.
Thank you, Kelly. So yeah, gentlemen, I can't believe we're already at the end of our time. This has been a great conversation. I think that maybe we can go around the horn with the last few minutes and just kind of have final thoughts from everyone, if that makes sense. So John, if I could start with you, final thoughts on the things we've been talking about here today.
Yeah, so it's uncertainty is just the key word here. How do you deal with uncertainty? You just have to be adaptable. One thing I didn't mention is that we are an open source company, and it's really interesting to see the adaptability of open source as it has just emerged as a key provider of technology. Open source has always been distributed, and people working not only from home, but never meeting each other in the creation of the software. It could very well be a model, for the future in terms of how we work together and how we collaborate. Think of the GitHub for everything, in terms of how we collaborate and how we update and work together. And again, I do think there's a place in the world for right-brain people, and just people matter, humans matter, and how we interact with each other, whether it's directly, visually, or digitally. It's just going to be so important, and that's going to play probably the defining role of what works and what doesn't work.
Fantastic.
Thank you. That was right on.
Thoughts? Final thoughts in the last 4 minutes.
Transformation, and again, I think you have to start, and I'll say this once again, you got to start as a business with basic business acumen and understanding of your balance sheet and kind of what you can and cannot afford, right? That is number one. I've seen too many companies, quite frankly, just dive into something without kind of doing the proper analysis from that perspective. So more now than ever, it's more critical to kind of take that just standard process and implement it into how do you go forward. And kind of the key indicator here is to be agile, as John kind of alluded to multiple times. It's to be agile, to be ready, because I don't know that this is over. I'm not predicting a second wave, but I would be certainly conscious of the fact that a second wave could easily come. So being ready for this kind of rebalance kind of into a kind of working from an office again, back to work, and so on in that chain. So it's, again, pick your bets, kind of go and kind of be creative around them, and don't kind of let this stop you from being innovative and creative in this environment. So, but like I said, you still got to use standard business practice when you're deciding how to proceed forward. So that's my continued recommendation.
And how do we know that a vaccine isn't 10 years away, like is normal?
That's my second side of my brain, is my biochemistry degree, and I'd argue we're a long way from a perfect scenario of how this is not going to continue to just go around the world and spread itself on. And I'm not trying to be the pessimist, and just being realistic. So yeah, there's a happy medium somewhere along, and I think we're months, not months away, but years away. So.
Okay, that's good insight. Thank you, Paul. Michael?
And we spent a lot of time talking kind of at the macro level where industries are going and regions and these things. But I think for a small business or even a mid-sized business, it's really important to look at the micro level and look at your employees and actually spend extra time with the communication. If you think you're uncertain, think about your employees. everything happening so quickly. So, you know, I've done some kind of webinars and training sessions on managing a team remotely. I think that's very critical, because we could have all these great plans, but if the team is not behind it, you're not going to execute on those plans. So it's really important to understand what's going on. Are they doing homeschooling as well as doing this job? Do they need to have more flexible hours? I think that's critical. And I think, you know, you could look at the big scheme and where we're going, but it's very critical at this stage to make sure you're communicating with your employees, open and honest. If you don't know, just say, I don't know. We're trying to figure this out. It can go such a long way in making sure that your team stays productive.
That's great. And in the last 30 seconds, Nick, you have the final word.
Yeah, great conversation today. My advice would be, yes, of course, make sure that you are financially viable, fail fast, be agile, and try new things. Don't sit on your hands. There's opportunity in crisis if you're looking for it. So I would be agile and look for those opportunities.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining with us today. You know, all the insights that you guys brought to this meeting were just outstanding. As you guys know, we're nowhere without our partners, so thank you for taking the time to be with us.